What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Trank. Today I'm going to be showing how to make this amazing live edge epoxy tabletop. It's going to be a full side table, but this is going to be part one. I'll just be covering how to take a punky, rotten slab and turn it into something absolutely beautiful. So stay tuned. I really love how this turned out. I think you guys are going to enjoy it as well. And let's go ahead and get started. So this project all starts with this amazing slab that I got from a co-worker, and this is actually spalted poplar, and so the spalted is actually causing this fungus, which gives this grain just all this crazy character. But the bad thing about it is that it was super punky and very brittle, and pieces were breaking. You can see just from sanding it there, so it definitely needed a lot of work. So the first thing I wanted to do was stabilize some of there's a large crack running through one of the sides and it was about ready to split there, and so I wanted to stabilize that with a couple bow ties. I decided to use yellow heart because I thought it would just really accent the piece. I went back and forth fussing about how to actually cut these bow ties out since I don't have a bandsaw, which is probably the easiest way to cut out bow ties. But I figured out on this method on the table saw that made it pretty simple and it's very safe. You just clamp the piece and tilt your blade at like a 10-to-1 ratio or whatever you want that angle to be, and you make those 4 cuts with a stop block, and then you leave a little there because if you leave the whole chunk there on the table saw to take away, it'll often bind up between the blade and not be good, I know from experience. And so I just left a little bit to chisel away at the end, and with 1 or 2 passes with the chisel you're left with a really nice little bow tie, and it's super simple to make them whatever size and whatever angle you want. So then I could work on transferring and doing the inlay for the bow tie. So you can see I'm doing 2 here. I thought that would fill the space nicely. On the first one, I just put it down with a bit of double-sided tape and CA glue, and then I carefully traced around it with my marking knife. It was really hard to see on this punky wood, and even more difficult was keeping the wood from splitting because it was so punky. It just wanted to crumble and break away, but I wanted these, of course, to be as clean of bow ties as I could. So I just carefully routed away and left maybe 1/8 to 1/32 of an inch, or 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch of the marked lines. I could then come in with a chisel and carefully back my way up to the lines, and again just being very conscientious of the kind of grain pattern and what's going to break away, what's not. You want to make sure you get into all the nooks and crannies and get all the debris out, otherwise it's not going to fully bottom out when you place your bow tie. And with a little bit of wood glue I can just fill that void and put some corresponding on the bow tie. You do want it to kind of overflow in this case because you're going to be flattening this later, so any squeeze out will be taken care of. And I go ahead and mallet that first one into place and trim it with a flush cut saw. This took a long time. I don't know why I was cutting so slow, but I usually have good success with this flush trim saw, but this took forever. Now I got a little smarter on the second bow tie, which is I put down a piece of blue tape before gluing the bow tie onto the slab. This way I could trace around it and I could actually peel up the tape around it to leave like a perfect template of where I needed to route. Again, when I just did the marking knife on the wood, it was really difficult to see where I was going, and that led to a slight gap on one of the sides of the bow tie, which I was able to avoid when I did it this way. So you can see there it's a much easier visual and indicator of where you need to route. I switched to a smaller router bit because with a larger bit you risk just breaking away pieces you don't want to. You have a little more control with a smaller bit. And of course I came back through with the chisel and cut back to those shoulder lines. Now this is actually going to be the top side of the piece. I know not everyone loves bow ties on top, but personally I think it's a really elegant look and kind of shows craftsmanship, so I decided to keep them on the top of this piece. And while the first bow tie went pretty well, this second one came out even better, and there was literally no gaps on any side of the bow tie, which I was really happy about, despite having to do it in the middle of this huge gap, which was quite difficult. And now I could get on to sealing the slab. So this is a super important step, especially if you have punky wood like this, because if you don't seal it with something all the oxygen that's in the wood is going to get released during the epoxy pour, and it's just going to lead to a ton of air bubbles. So I'm using the penetrating epoxy here. You basically just pour it and wipe it on with a brush. You can kind of be liberal with how much you put on. It was my first time using all these epoxies, so I didn't really know how much I was mixing up, so I kind of just tried to use however much I mixed up. I then made this one-off router flattening jig, and I bought a large surfacing bit. It was a 2-inch diameter surfacing bit, which was really pretty amazing to use. And I could come and start doing the initial flattening. What I did is I used some shims and some hot glue there on the lower edge. You can probably see that, in order to get this to sit firmly and without moving on the MDF. Then it's just a matter of slowly creeping the depth further and further with the router bit until you get a complete pass across the entire slab. At that point, you know that that face is indeed flat and coplanar with the plane of the jig. This step is really messy, but it really is amazing because you kind of start to see things come to life, and it was awesome to do this. It was my first time working with a slab like this. Now I had lots of large voids that went all the way through the bottom side, so I couldn't do a deep pour epoxy because it would just end up leaking through. So I kind of came up with this alternative method of pouring in CA glue and then immediately hitting it with activator to sort of seal it off from going all the way through. This took a ton of time because you can see how many little voids needed to be filled here, but this is what it looks like after filling those all with CA glue. I use thick CA glue because it just gives, it's more viscous and it fills those larger gaps a little bit better. And with those done, it was back to one more flattening before getting on to the next step. Here you really want to take off the minimal amount possible because you just want to get a fresh plane on there. You don't want to, you don't want to try to lose any thickness of the piece at this point. With it completely flat, I could go ahead and sand it. I went through the grits, I think up to about 220 or so. And the whole time I kept it glued down to the MDF just because it helped me keep everything stationary. And I decided at this point I wasn't going to do the underside because I had already lost so much thickness on the slab. I think doing the underside would have left me with barely anything. I was too eager to wait for the epoxy to see how it was going to look, so I went ahead and wiped some mineral spirits to get rid of the sawdust anyway, and you can just see the amazing character of the wood pop out at this point. And it's a good indicator. It shows you any areas you need to work on before proceeding. And now we could do the part I was most nervous about, which is the tabletop pour. This was I'd helped a coworker do one once, but this was my first time doing it on my own. And of course, this can really be a make or break moment, whether this piece kind of gets ruined at this point. I just did decide to keep the bark on, as you can see. I know people have mixed opinions about that, but I think the epoxy will seal it okay, and we'll see how it does in the long run. Anyway, you have about 30 minutes of working time with the tabletop epoxy, and it's a very stressful 30 minutes. You want to make sure you get rid of any drips on the underside, make sure all the bark on the outside is coated, and you want to make sure any air bubbles that are forming get taken care of before it starts to tack up. So basically for 30 minutes I'm pupping this piece, and even after that I come through quite a bit. Now here it is before it dries, and it looks absolutely incredible. I was so happy with how it was looking already. And all I was thinking was, I hope that it looks like this in the morning and that it doesn't fill with air bubbles. So I left it to dry overnight. I placed a piece of MDF just to keep any fibers and debris from entering the top. And I was very happy to find that the next morning the piece was, in fact, awesome. And I'm just so stoked about how this turned out. I can't wait to make a base for it and put the table together. So I'll leave you guys with a few of the last shots here, but that's going to do it for part 1 of this video. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2 where we'll make the base. Alright guys, that's going to do it for part 1 of this video. I'm absolutely thrilled with how it turned out. It's gorgeous, it feels amazing, and I'm super excited to make an equally nice looking base and have a completed side table. So if you enjoyed this guys, be sure to subscribe to my channel, leave a like and comment on this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on part 2 of the video.